Good morning and welcome to Air Sage Brewing Data. My name is Robert Kohler, and I want to thank you for tuning in to learn more about data today. A little bit about myself. I'm the CRO at Air Sage and a professional transportation planner with about two decades of experience in transportation and big data spaces. Today, we're going to be covering some really interesting topics. We're going to talk about transit investments and decision making, specifically related to equity, increasing efficiency, and optimizing cost. Also, challenges in financing infrastructure, mobility on demand, and innovations in information sharing with riders. Today, we're lucky to have Kammy Horne from Via Metropolitan Transit today in San Antonio, Texas. She's responsible for service and capital planning, capital engineering, passenger amenities, and real estate acquisition and management. Definitely a lot of hats. She's also leading many of Via's efforts under Keep San Antonio Moving, a voter-approved plan designed to improve the transit system. She, she has a wealth of experience in public and private sectors, serves as the vice chair of APTA's Planning, Policy, and Program Development Committee, as well as being an active member of WTS. With all of this, I'm very excited and eager to introduce Kammy Horne to the show. Hello and good morning, Kammy.
Oh, good morning, Robert. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, definitely. Happy Friday. Not to put you on the hot seat, but we're here for coffee and data, so let's jump right into it. And
Sounds good.
lot of great topics we have written down today. So let's start with smart investments in transit and making it more affordable, prioritizing equity and transportation improvements for decision making. So, what are some barriers you guys find trying to achieve equity in transportation?
Well, I want to start with thinking about equity in general and the focus on equity. So I do think that in terms of equity, something that we think about a lot is equity to access, and that's where transportation comes in. So, access to jobs, access to education, access to healthcare, really access to everything in our lives is the conduit is transportation. And I think one of the biggest barriers that we have in achieving equity in transportation really has to do with the focus on funding and policy related to public transportation, because car ownership in and of itself can be such a barrier. It's costly, and that might not just be like a zero car household, even when there's, just one car in a household, but perhaps two people that need the vehicle, or more. That can be very, very challenging to maintain, any employment and other activities in daily life. So historically, uh, and very much in San Antonio, that funding for public transportation has lagged behind the funding for highways and other roadways in general. So public transportation and funding, number one, I think that's very, very important in achieving equity in transportation. And I'll share with you that, although it is by choice, I made the choice to go carless, just to have the experience and to think about this. Now, I don't have the challenges, definitely that others have in terms of, needing a car for daycare or other things, but I using the bus and using the bus in San Antonio to go about my daily activities does make me think about what are those challenges? What are those challenges in terms of equal access? And we've done a lot of looking at that in San Antonio in terms of the length of time that it takes for someone to go from point A to point B, and the access that both we've done some looking at specific areas in San Antonio, and we look at, well, how how long does it take to access parts of the city by car versus public transportation, and you really see the disparity. So um, that affects both employers and employees. And so I think focus on funding, focusing on policy in general. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about San Antonio and where we are with San Antonio. But one thing I do want to mention in the U.S., I'm very excited about the U.S. DOT's focus on Justice 40, the Justice 40 initiative, to deliver at least 40% of federal investments to disadvantaged communities. San Antonio can definitely benefit from that because there are so many areas of persistent poverty, and the census data actually, shows that San Antonio is, I believe, the most impoverished city in the U.S. So I'm excited about the fact that in the U.S. and the policy is leaning towards looking at more equity in transportation and public transportation.
Absolutely. That's great to hear that, there might be the federal money available to help offset and improve what you guys are working on. From your experience, what transportation investment decisions have you made or even helped guide in order to increase that efficiency and optimization of cost to hopefully lower the cost of ridership?
Sure. Well, I'll start with our Keep San Antonio Moving initiative that was passed by the voters in 2020 to add some funding to VIA and starting in 2026. So I need to start by saying that we are one of the most underfunded systems, large systems in the U.S. We are funded by a sales tax, and so we do a lot with a little. And so we are constantly thinking about what we can do to increase efficiency and make the dollars go further. Our system and our service area is very large. It's over 1,200 square miles. It's more in line with Houston and double that of DART and in Austin systems. So, one of the things that we are doing and it's part of Keep San Antonio Moving, really to increase access, increase frequency, look at what we can do to maximize the use of the traditional bus where that works best. And then adding to that, using what we call Via Link. It's a mobility on demand type of service. And so we are using that and implementing that type of service in zones, in areas where the bus doesn't work as well. And those are areas where that are not as dense, and where the road patterns aren't as great for the traditional bus. We're not showing a map of San Antonio, but we kind of have two loops, and the more inner loop is 410, and an outer loop is 1604. So kind of outside that initial highway loop is where we're initially looking. We started our first zone in the northeast of our service area a few years ago, and it was really one of the largest of its kind in the U.S., 17 square miles. And so people can use this Uber pool or Lyft pool type of service to get around anywhere in that 17 square mile zone, and also get into our actual our bus network. So it's provided a great service. We're able to provide it 7 days a week on demand and at less of a cost. So then we more recently opened the service in a northeast zone, similar size, and then we're moving over the summer to add another zone in the south. And additionally, we are trying out kind of a commuter type service in an area called Sandy Oaks, where you can get from that one city into our network. It's not an anywhere to anywhere, but it's a point to point, and it's an on-demand service. So that's definitely a tool that we've been able to use to maximize the efficiency. It's the same cost as the traditional bus fare, so that makes it even more accessible. All of our vehicles are accessible, and you can use your smartphone, or you can, if you don't have a smartphone, you can call in. And so we make sure that the service is open to all and equitable.
No, that's great. Increasing access to transit, increasing access to and from different things that matter in life, whether it's home and doctors or errands people have to run or jobs. These are ways we can help encourage and improve the quality of life for everybody in the region. And it sounds like it's quite productive in San Antonio. And I think that's a great segue into talking about mobility on demand with Via Link and the other things we just talked about. So clearly they can work in unison together where it sounds like it might not just be door to door, but maybe first mile, last mile, or getting somebody to that transit network, kind of working together, which would probably streamline the process and overall lower the costs of the overall system. I've been on many buses in urban areas where there's almost nobody on the network, but they continue to have the bus service, which it sounds like this would be a better way to do that. So I guess the question is, how effective in terms of operation are these types of smart services from either an economic standpoint or even different ways you can look at that?
Well, in terms of effectiveness, we've seen them to be very, very effective. I want to also say something, Robert. I'm really glad that you brought up the term quality of life, because I think that's what we really are striving for, is better quality of life and reducing the barriers to that great quality of life by everything that we're doing with public transportation. And so, we do see that these services are have been very effective, in, like I said, they're not for your entire system, but they are a tool. They're a tool to increase access into the areas of your traditional bus service. They're a tool to really be able to, I mentioned our system area, our service area, and being so large. So they're a tool to be able to increase that coverage, at a cost that can be less, especially when we're replacing, which we have in the Northeast and Northwest. We've been able to basically remove underperforming bus lines and add this service. But then in other areas, we're just going to be able to add the service where we didn't have any service before. And so that's very effective and useful. And the other thing that I found too, so they're virtual stops, and those virtual stops can be moved. So if the virtual stop is not the stop that's necessarily the best place, where the most people need it, it's easy to move, because it's a virtual stop. So that's very effective. And then in our Northwest zone, the other thing that we've seen that's been very effective about this type of service, it's flexible. So now you can't continue to add on to your zones necessarily without, have the, technically speaking, you can't just make the zones larger and larger and larger, but you can add and subtract to the zones and be rather flexible with that. So we opened our Northwest zone and then realized there was a portion to add to that zone that would make it even more effective. So we were able to do that really quickly. And it just made the entire that service area of that zone more effective. So I love the flexibility of that tool, and it's like I said. So I think that makes it even more effective in terms of use.
Yeah, and it sounds like flexibility and dynamic opportunities are really a new thing to put into that toolbox with you've got different tools to combine, but also the flexibility, which might even vary seasonally or by time of day. You can do a lot more with all these different solutions you're able to implement either on a case by case or region by region base. And also presumably as populations begin to grow in certain areas and maybe even decrease in other areas, these types of dynamic things will probably shift and keep that ability to have it as a dynamic system altogether. So, how do you
Absolutely.
guys how do you measure ROI, if at all, for your clients? Is that something that you guys are able to do for these types of um, tools?
Absolutely. And as a public transportation provider, we need to do that. We need to make sure that we have good return on our investment and and measure that in a way that is meaningful. But also, I think we need to be flexible in that because this is a new tool. And what do I mean by that? Well, when we start a pilot service, I and let's just take, for example, our northeast sector where we did remove some bus lines, and that was the first time we tried this. Right, we wanted to make sure that the cost was going to be um, the cost of the new service um, was was not going to be so much more than the bus service, the traditional bus service, and that we were able to serve more people. So we're looking at things, the cost per passenger and the cost per hour and all those things when we're looking at the pilot service, but also at the same time making sure that people know about the service and looking at the number of new users. So I think it is very important to look at the ROI, especially when you're doing a pilot, but at the same time, make sure that you're measuring and looking at other things like the number of new accounts and the number, so that as you don't want to just eliminate a service without trying a few things first. We talked about the flexibility. Okay, well, maybe this wasn't the most effective, or maybe we're not getting as many passengers, with this zone. But maybe if we shift it just a little bit, we'll capture more. And keep trying things, keep experimenting until we get it absolutely right. So there's a few different things that we measure, but we definitely look at our ridership on a weekly basis for all of our zones, and like I said, as well as the new accounts and that type of information. We monitor it constantly.
Excellent. Yeah. And, there's a lot of innovations out there that you guys are doing. Specifically in this world, we have private versus public dollars available for Naviland's project, and smart innovations with new mobility and transit-oriented development becoming more relevant. So what innovative projects beyond the micromobility and kind of toolbox are you working on to help improve the transportation in the San Antonio region?
Well, let me talk about two. And the first would be San Antonio's first rapid transit network. We call that advanced rapid transit because, in terms of the technology and the uh, uh, even the vehicles, everything that we're going to be doing in as smart a way as possible, state of the art. And so, our first advanced rapid transit line goes through a key corridor of San Antonio, generally from the downtown and south up to our airport, and this rapid transit network. So it's, like I said, it's the first of its kind. We're super excited about it. We had 158 million line item in the president's budget just recently, a first for San Antonio in the Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Grants Program. And so that is so super exciting. It will serve as a spine for other types of investments, again, coming into the system, including potential for an east-west corridor. So this type of rapid transit is just so great for our system, and primarily operating in its own dedicated right of way. And again, San Antonio is the seventh largest city. It does not have this type of investment. And we've been talking about flexibility, and I think bus rapid transit is a great and somewhat, flexible service that can respond to changes in land use and other things. We're using a bus. That bus can get off that line. It's, it's not set, but it's also something that will provide a rapid transit that's not in conflict for the most part with the traditional automobile along the line. So I'm super excited about that, and it is part of our Keep San Antonio Moving plan. And I'll just put in a plug if you're interested in looking at that. It's at keepsamoving.com. You can look at everything. You can look at our advanced rapid transit. You can take a deeper dive into our VIA link and everything that we're doing there, as well as some of the other fundamentals of that plan. The other thing I'll mention too is, and you talked about it, Robert. So it's the Navalins that we began the Navalins. The Navalins, I would say, I believe it was about a year ago. We started a pilot project, and then we have additional funding for that. And I'd encourage everyone to take a look at what that is. So it's, the use of QR codes at our bus stops for, I think initially the idea is for sight impaired individuals to be able to, just take their phone from a great distance away, and it scans the code and it gives you information on the next bus and everything else that you would need to know at that bus stop. And so we're expanding that. But that type of a innovation is great for everyone because it's just a great tool. And so I'm super excited about the Navalins and our ability now with our additional funding to expand that program. And I love that innovation. I love the expansion of the accessibility for all that we're doing with Navalins.
Yeah, it was quite intriguing to learn a little bit more about the project from an accessibility standpoint, but also as we have people aging in place longer now, we have more people getting onto transit than maybe years before, where the average life is increasing. So I think technologies and platforms like Navalens will help get people onto the platform in the system of transit longer, and when they otherwise might not be able to look at a timetable or pull up an app that would, you have to type in what your route would be. It presumably is going to show you where you are and where you want to go. And
That's a great point, Robert. That is a great point. I mean, the aging in place, and absolutely, yes.
so being a transit user means placing a level of trust in the provider. I've been a frequent transit provider in many of the big cities I've lived in, all of which operate much differently between New York City, DC, and Atlanta. How frequently are updates made on your transit centers that VIA offers, specifically at like park and ride locations? Are there real time updates to keep passengers in the loop, in waiting areas? Are there staff available? What types of things do you guys have to bring at ease your passengers that are also your customers?
So, in terms of our service changes in general, those happen, on a somewhat regular basis, right? At about 3 times a year. Although we've had to make some other adjustments because of COVID and operator shortages. So we have an extensive public outreach that goes into every one of our service changes. But we also have passenger tools. We have ambassadors that are able to support passengers when we do make adjustments. But we do have real time data, and we use that as our next bus arrival. So you can text your bus stop and get the next bus arrival information. I use the bus every day, so I'm constantly using that, and I love that because you can be at a location near your bus stop, put the number in, and then know, okay, well, it's going to take me this time to get out there and catch my bus. That's super great. And then we use Transit app, and that also connects into our VIA app. If you have our VIA app, then you'll also be directed to the Transit app, which also uses that real-time data. And I love that too, because it does typically show you where your bus is. If you're putting in your trip, you can kind of track when your bus is going to show up. And the other thing that I want to put a plug in for the use of that app is that for new users to the system, you're able to put your trip in, then you board your bus, and it will tell you, it will alert you if you're not quite sure. Like if you say, okay, I'm going to go to this location, and you put that in, but you've never been there before, it'll alert you when to get off of the bus. Some of this stuff is going to sound super basic to people, but for folks that have never used public transportation, it's a great tool. It's a great tool because it reduces the stress and the uncertainty of, if I get on the bus, how will I know when to get off? How will I know where to get to the next destination when I do get off? And it typically gives you, a map or other information about how to get there. So I've loved using that, and I've tried it out in many other, different to the cities, and it's been very, very useful. So we use that as well, real-time data. And we also have that real-time data at kiosks and other places in most of our major transit centers and other what we call super stops. It'll show you when the next bus arrival is. So
That's great. And you brought up a good term, the level of stress a rider, specifically a new rider, might have. I have zero problem getting onto a new transit system anywhere in the world. A lot of people might be apprehensive to even taking the bus from LaGuardia Airport, for instance, in New York City to Manhattan. It's a very simple single seat ride. You don't have to get to the subway, but all these different locations are making the information more easily accessible to different types of people, those who might have an app, those who might want to look at a kiosk or talk to an ambassador. So having those different methods of communication and transmitting data to your riders, I think is critical. And I think ultimately it's going to help out, especially with letting people know, okay, your stop is approaching, get ready to ring the bell or stand up or whatever the system might be if you're on a bus, for instance.
I should have pointed out, yes, it tells you when you need to say, all right, I need to need to get off. Very important.
So the technology space is greatly changing significantly in the past 5 to 10 years. How do you think urban and transportation planners can leverage location data to help them plan and build more comprehensive and complete transportation networks and developments? Because in the end, it would be great if they can tie TODs into your system, kind of instead of the other way around, unless there's a way for that. But the location data, how do you see that working?
Well, I think the location data is incredibly important for us. Of course, it's the travel patterns, the job clusters, the time of day, and I like what you're introducing into this is, so how to other planners, how can they access so that we have a win-win in terms of that reciprocal relationship between land use and transportation. I mean, really, all I can say about it is it's important because our travel patterns are changing. We get the question all the time, well, what's going to happen after COVID? I don't know, but we're sure going to be monitoring it, and we're going to be trying to do what we can on the transportation side to make sure that we adjust our public transportation to meet the demand of our riders, again, whether that's time of day or location job clusters. So I think that data can also be used when planning in advance. We're doing some innovative stuff here in San Antonio with new mobility hubs. And we're working with the Urban Land Institute and City of San Antonio and others. So, that's an opportunity too, to think about use of that data to make sure that we are planning those mobility hubs, whether it's for bikes or trails or other non-motorized and public transportation, to make sure that we're planning those in a smart way for the city as well.
Absolutely. And working with ULI along with your team of planners and the city and region just sounds like an amazing ability, but also coupling with your dynamic and flexible options. I mean, that's really how we will get back to reality, whatever normal is going to be gradually as it changes, is flexibility, dynamic things. And like you said, continually looking at the data week after week. What are we seeing? Where can we change? Where can we improve or optimize? I think that's the way forward that we need to all take as a society of planners, engineers, developers, and transit agencies. But Kammy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been quite informative and such a joy to speak with you. So I know I feel much more educated. I hope our viewers have also learned a lot more. I was unaware of how large San Antonio's region really is when you look at it as an urban area in the entire nation. So that's great to see. But before we leave, I want to say that I hope everybody can join us next week when we have Carol Schweiger on the show. Carol is the president of Schweiger Consulting, located in Wakefield, Massachusetts. She was previously VP at Trans Systems in Kansas City, an expert in ITS and advanced public transportation systems, and providing technical assistance in transportation systems engineering. With that, I wish you all a great day and weekend. Kammy, it has been a joy chatting with you today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all the work that you're doing in this space. It's so important.
Thank you all. Have a great day and come back to Brewing Data.